In the early hours of August 8, 1963, as most of Britain lay sleeping, an extraordinary event unfolded that would soon dominate headlines and become one of the most talked about crimes in UK history. A mail train making its routine overnight journey from Glasgow to London was quietly steaming through the countryside, unaware that it was about to be ambushed in what would later be remembered as one of the boldest and most meticulously planned robberies ever committed. This wasn't just any train. Officially known as the Up Special, it was carrying an unusually large amount of cash, millions of pounds in post office sacks due to a backlog of bank transactions from a recent bank holiday. In modern terms, the value of that cash would be equivalent to over £50 million or $60 million USD. And it wasn't by coincidence that the criminals behind this operation knew that. For weeks, they had been watching, observing, noting the schedules, the crew habits, and even the terrain surrounding the tracks. Their plan was ambitious and extraordinarily precise. Shortly after 3 o'clock a.m., as the train approached a secluded section of track near Ledburn in Buckinghamshire, the gang set their trap into motion. Using a simple yet clever method, they rigged a fake red signal light using a car battery and wires. When the unsuspecting driver, David Whitby, spotted the light, he did exactly what was expected. He brought the train to a full stop, unaware that danger lurked just beyond the shadows. What happened next was straight out of a crime thriller. 15 men made up the core group of the gang, and they moved with purpose and coordination. Dressed as railway workers and equipped with tools, they climbed aboard the locomotive, subdued the train crew, and took control. Their goal was to separate the engine and the first two carriages, which contained the mailbags, from the rest of the train. They then ordered the crew to move the isolated section forward to a spot known as Bridego Bridge, a rural overpass surrounded by fields and silence. This location wasn't chosen by chance. It was selected months in advance after careful scouting, because it provided privacy, time, and just enough access to nearby roads for a swift getaway. Under the cover of darkness, and with the sound of the countryside shielding their activity, the gang unloaded 120 mailbags, each filled with high-value packages and banknotes. They transferred the bags to waiting vehicles and vanished into the night. The entire heist took only minutes. In total, the robbers escaped with £2.6 million. To put that in perspective, that amount would be worth tens of millions today, making it the largest cash theft in history at the time. But while the execution was bold, it wasn't flawless. The gang retreated to their hideout, Leatherslade Farm, a rented farmhouse about 30 miles away. It had been carefully chosen for its isolation, and had even been modified to house the robbers and store the stolen cash. For a time, it seemed like the plan had worked. They lay low, playing cards, listening to the radio, and reading newspaper articles about the crime they had just pulled off. However, their arrogance was their undoing. They stayed at the farm longer than they should have. Instead of fleeing quickly or destroying evidence, they left behind fingerprints on utensils, furniture, and playing cards. When police eventually raided the property after a tip-off and some determined investigation, they found overwhelming forensic evidence linking several of the men to the crime. The manhunt launched by Scotland Yard was one of the largest in British history. Led by Detective Chief Superintendent Tommy Butler, investigators scoured the countryside, followed leads, interrogated suspects, and carefully pieced together the movements of the gang. Over the following months, arrests were made. Prominent members of the group such as Ronnie Biggs, Buster Edwards, Charlie Wilson, and Gordon Goody were captured and brought to trial. The sentences were severe, with many receiving 25 to 30 years in prison. But the Great Train Robbery was far from over. What kept the story alive for decades was what followed: daring prison escapes, fugitive lifestyles, and cultural fascination. Ronnie Biggs famously escaped from Wandsworth prison in 1965 by climbing a wall with a rope ladder and hopping onto a waiting furniture van. He fled the country and eventually settled in Brazil, where he lived openly, giving interviews and becoming somewhat of a celebrity. Because of Brazil's extradition laws and his relationship with a Brazilian woman, the UK couldn't force him to return. Buster Edwards, another key figure in the gang, later opened a flower store near Waterloo Station and lived a quiet, if slightly infamous, life. He even had a movie made about him, Buster 1988, starring Phil Collins, which further romanticized his role in the heist. The idea that these men had managed to pull off such an epic robbery and evade full justice captivated the public's imagination. Some saw them as criminal masterminds, others as working-class anti-heroes who outsmarted the system. Yet, despite the gang's early success, the consequences were significant. Many served long prison terms, some never reintegrated into society, and a few spent the rest of their lives either hiding or running. In the end, very little of the stolen money was ever recovered. Only about £400,000 was traced. The rest seemingly vanished, hidden or spent long ago. The robbery also had a lasting impact on British law enforcement. It highlighted weaknesses in railway security and led to changes in how high-value transports were handled. It also reinforced the importance of forensic evidence. Fingerprints, recovered items, and witness accounts all played a key role in solving the case. Today, the Great Train Robbery remains a legendary event in British criminal history. It has inspired books, documentaries, and films. The story has been dissected and debated countless times, and new theories continue to emerge. Who might have helped the gang? Was there an inside man? Could more money still be hidden somewhere? Even now, over 60 years later, the fascination endures. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the amount of money stolen, but the sheer nerve, preparation, and mystery surrounding it. It wasn't a violent crime. No one was killed, though the train driver, Jack Mills, was injured, and yet its cultural impact was enormous. It redefined what was possible in criminal circles and proved that with enough planning, even a national transport system could be exploited. Some of the robbers died in obscurity, others in the spotlight. Ronnie Biggs, after decades on the run, finally returned to the UK in 2001 due to failing health and served time in prison before being released on compassionate grounds. He passed away in 2013. Buster Edwards died in 1994, and several others faded from public life entirely. What remains is the myth, the image of a gang of clever thieves dressed in workman's clothing, pulling off a multi-million-pound robbery under the nose of the British establishment. The reality is far more complex. Behind the headlines and Hollywood-style stories were real people, real consequences, and a nation that watched in both shock and awe. The Great Train Robbery wasn't just a crime, it was a moment in history. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. You won't want to miss tomorrow's historical crime mystery. And let's hear your thoughts in the comments. Were these men daring masterminds or reckless criminals who got lucky?